Today we're going to talk about government and creating plans when we talk about parliamentary debate. So we're going to introduce what a plan is, what a policy round is, and the good parts of a policy round, what makes a policy round good, and how you should look to basically win rounds where policy is in place and needed. So this is just a basic sort of background definition of what a policy round is. So basically you have an actor in a policy round, and you are trying to advocate on the behalf of that actor making an action. So the action is obviously your policy that you are putting in place. So when you look at sort of the different sort of resolutions that you may see in a policy setting, you have three different types. The first of these is a loose resolution. So these resolutions are sort of very broad and very open to government interpretation. An example of this would be "This House would fight for the water," where you're sort of given a lot of room to interpret that in a lot of different ways. A little bit more strict than a loose resolution is a straight resolution. So it's somewhat open to interpretation, but not quite as much as a loose resolution. So this would be "This House should reduce gun violence." Obviously open to a little bit of interpretation, but a super tight resolution would be something like "The U.S. federal government should enact Medicare for all." So this is calling for a direct, specific action from a specific actor that you have to argue for. There's very little interpretation left to be open. So those are the three main sort of resolutions that you can see in a policy round. It's also important to note that when you look at a policy round, and you should, and when you look at basically what makes a policy round, how you should decide whether to craft a policy or not, you should be looking at two main words after sort of "this house," after your actor. These words are "would" and "should." When you see either of these words, you know that you have to be advocating for something and that a policy round is necessary. So basically you have four main parts of a plan. Your first is resolutional analysis, sort of your background, your framework, setting up the resolution. The second is inherency, which is the background, basically the state of the world currently. Then you have your plan or your proposal, and then you have your advantages. So the main parts of sort of a policy round are your proposal and your advantages. Those should take up some of the bulk of your speech. However, it is still important to understand and look at the resolutional analysis, which is the first part of your round. In this part, you give thanks to anybody in the room, such as the judge, such as any visitors, spectators, the opposing team, and your partner. Make sure you give a nice blanket of thank yous. The second part of this is definitions, so defining words within the resolution. If you have the resolution, for example, "This house should reduce gun violence," you have to define "this house," you have to define "should," you have to define "reduce," and then you have to reduce gun violence. When you look at these definitions, these can be open to a lot of different interpretation, depending on the length of the resolution or the brevity of the resolution. So you always want to define "this house" to make sure that the people know what the actor is, but you can sort of group other words together and define them in one chunk, not just define every word individually, which is important to save time, make everything a little bit more clear. The last part of any good resolutional analysis, the first part of this sort of talk, is the framework. So providing a framework, making sure that the judge knows that this is going to be a policy round, making sure that your opponent knows that this is going to be a policy round, and basically setting that up for everybody in the room. After you have your framework and your resolutional analysis, the second part is the inherency. So this is basically saying that the world right now, the world in which the actor lives in, is not in a good state. And here's why. That's your inherency. So you have to make sure that you have a good inherency with your claim, your support, and your warrant to make sure that your acting, your policy, your proposal has good ground to sit upon. Making sure that when you attempt to put this policy in place, you're putting it in place for a reason, to make some meaningful change in a world that clearly needs it based on your inherency. If you look at this, the argument structure of this good inherency, the second part of a speech, you have your claim that there is a problem, your support that you see people hurt by this problem, and your warrants that all people being hurt is a problem. So making sure that the judge understands that this is something that needs to have an effect and something that needs to be changed. That's basically your inherency or the background to your policy. Then you get into the policy itself. So this is basically set up in four main steps. You have your what, how, when, and who. Of course, your who. So who is the actor? who is basically going to be taking the action that the policy puts in place. This could be the U.S. federal government, it can be a city council, or it can be sort of a board of education. It can be any number of things that you've defined in your definitions and your resolutional analysis. How much money and effort will it cost? You have to make sure that you sort of give some monetary basis for any policy that you're putting in place. When you look at something like reducing gun violence or creating a border wall, you may be looking at a policy that has a hefty cost, where if you're looking at a policy that's maybe impeaching the president or legalizing marijuana, there isn't much cost that's going to be given to that. So these can sway depending on how you interpret the resolution and what the resolution is. Next is how much time it will take and when can it start. So the when. This isn't a crucial part of any policy round, but it's important to make sure you check off this box and provide a reasonable time frame for the policy that you are putting in place. The last part of a good proposal and a good plan is what the plan is going to do. So this may be for reducing gun violence, instituting regulatory background checks, or making sure that people have maybe a counselor for gun violence and when they do purchase a gun. So that's basically what the plan is going to do. These are all the main parts that you need to cover when you propose some plan. These are basically boxes that you make sure that you have to check off so that the opposing team can't sort of hit any chinks in your armor that is your policy. The last part, and arguably the most important part of any good policy round, is your advantages. These are sort of causal chains with positive consequences that are going to be positively affecting the world in which you set up in your inherency. So this is making sure that you have a clear structure to your contentions, such as an ABC format, a 1, 2, 3 format, basically making sure that you list your contentions clearly so that the judge, your opponent, and your partner can flow considerably and understand what you were trying to say. The most important part of these advantages is that you make sure that there's a clear sort of chain of events that you are linking together to make sure that a clear effect is going to be taking place in the world that you've put forth in your resolution. So making sure that your plan that you've put forth to reduce gun violence is actually going to reduce gun violence, and why reducing gun violence is necessarily a good thing. You can see a couple of examples here with Medicare for All, such as creating Medicare for All is going to lower overall insurance costs, leads to more people using healthcare, which means that better overall health is necessarily a good thing. There's a couple more examples here, but basically you understand the idea that this is a causal chain of events that leads to an overall net benefit for the world in which your inherency is set up. So there's an example. Here are some other examples of possible policy resolutions. Again, you can see the words would and should clearly put in place here. So overall, it's important to understand that any good policy plan that you put in place in parliamentary debate has these 4 key things, and if you can cover for these 4 key things well and speak fluently, speak clearly, make sure that you are actually persuading the judge, then you, my friend, have crafted an excellent policy case. Thank you.